But Jim, it's time to wake up. And before we get to the next thing, if you don't mind, I know it's your show, but can I interrupt with something to follow up on something?
Good heavens.
I'm following up. I'm just following up.
All right,
on
a redirect, ladies and gentlemen.
I grabbed this. This is the thing I was telling you about earlier with Jim Londos.
Oh, yes.
The date of the show, the press pass for the wrestling show, Lee Darst, promoter, is February 6, 1935. It appears to be Rockford, Illinois. To broadcast Londos bout, brisk advance sale is reported for Match Show. The championship wrestling match between Jim Londos, World Heavyweight Champion, and Ole Olsen, the Milwaukee Swedish heavyweight, at the Shrine Temple on Thursday evening will be broadcast over WROK with Brant Bloomquist at the mic. Mike in quotes, M-I-K-E. The Londos Olsen bout will be the only one broadcast. Meanwhile, the advanced sale of tickets continue to be brisk, and promoter Lee Darst is confident that the Shrine will be packed to capacity when Londos and Olsen crawl through the ropes. Monday, the first day that general admission were placed on sale at the cigar counter at the Nelson Hotel.
Again, that's so great. In the 30s and 40s and 50s, and even later in some places, remember the Holland Hotel in Manhattan was the booking office for the WWF. They would have the wrestling office at a hotel, and you would go and you would get the tickets there at a window for it.
Well, in this case, it was at the cigar stand, the cigar counter at the Nelson Hotel, and that saw over half of the pasteboards grabbed up, while yesterday's demand was almost as great. Reserved seats are on sale at the State and Madison and Grand Recreations, Henry White's Arcade, the West Side Smoke Shop, and, this one's a little hard to read, Kitterhan and Snyder. Londos tossed Jack Smith, who appears in the semi-windup here Thursday night against Hans Bauer, in a little over 44 minutes in their title match in Chicago Monday night, using a body slam to gain the fall after a whirl in Londos' famous airplane spin had Smith groggy. Pat Mulligan, a light heavyweight champion who mingles with Rudy Hoffman on the Shrine card, had an easy time defending his title on the same card when he pinned Gus Clem, and what a name, in 17 minutes and 3 seconds. There's also something here, again another thing announcing it'll be heard on the radio WROK. Wrestlers to weigh in at WROK Studio. Something new in the weighing-in ceremonies for a wrestling show will be tried this evening at 7:45 p.m., when the 8 big boys on tonight's card at the Coliseum will be given the once-over by the examining physician and commissioner before the mic, again in quotes, in the WROK studio. Each wrestler, as he is weighed and examined, will speak a few words, as will the physician and the commissioner.
Good way to get points there.
Following the weigh-in, the wrestlers will be rushed to the Coliseum in cars. Brant Bloomquist will conduct the broadcast.
And, so they mentioned the Monday night match in Chicago. At this time, Londos was by far the biggest draw in wrestling. And I know it doesn't sound like it, but Ole Olsen was a name at that point also that, he was a main event guy in a variety of places. But since he was in Chicago, this is Rockford, Illinois, not exactly, a major market, especially in 1935. But the promoter would book Londos out for these spot shows when he was in the main town, and people would go crazy because it was the equivalent of The Rock or Austin coming, and they would do the radio remote, and they'd do I'm sure the arena did sell out in Rockford for Londos when he's drawing, tens of thousands of people in Chicago. But that's an example of a 1930s style spot show. And that promoter was probably the promoter in in Rockford and maybe another town or two, but they were who was promoting Chicago at that point? Was it
It
was it
wasn't
Ed
Kohler
White?
yet. Kohler was still
It
wrestling.
was it Ed White? Was he I'm trying to why does that name pop up?
I'm not sure. I want to look into. I
But
mean, it's interesting too. What else is on here? The Jack Dempsey Luis Firpo Heavyweight Championship out in New York several years ago, labeled the most exciting and thrilling heavyweight bouts in the history of the boxing game, will be broadcast over WROK tonight. Brant Bloomquist, WROK's sports announcer, will give a blow-by-blow account of the historic ring battle with all the sidelights that surrounded a championship scrap. He will go on the air at 10:30 p.m. Well, that's crazy. That's just a recreation of the fight.
yes, Lance Russell used to do those. As he said, when he started on television, it was called radio. He would do recreations of like football games or boxing, matches or whatever based on the wire service reports before there was, just instant communication everywhere. And that's how he was able to, when they did the WCW hotline, you could call up and you could hear Lance Russell calling the action for house shows, right? But the problem was he realized that they were cookie cuttering the house shows and the lineups were all the same. So he'd sit at ringside and he would call the match with different people in it than were actually having it and use the ring noise. And he'd just call a match in his head, but you heard it happening in the ring.
This is there's a lot of mentions on both sides of this of Brant Bloomquist, so this is either a big fan of his or, considering the press pass here, maybe it's from his estate.
I think it might be him, yeah.
One last one here. Wrestling promoter to broadcast today. Lee Darst, promoter of the heavyweight wrestling show at the Coliseum Wednesday, will be introduced to sports fans of Rockford this afternoon in a radio interview over WROK at 5:45 p.m. Brant Bloomquist, sports announcer for the local station, will present the likable newcomer from St. Louis who established residence in Rockford 3 weeks ago and plans to make the Forest City his home. Darst, a product of St. Louis, will discuss the highlights of Rockford's first big wrestling show, which offers the following high-class card. Hans Bauer, 212 Germany, versus Jack Smith, 210 Chicago. Lou Plummer, 230, Waukegan, versus Jack Zarevich, 215, Russia. Holly Olsen, 230, Milwaukee, versus Harold Metheny, 210, Wood River, Illinois. And finally, Jim McMillan, 220, is it Antioch, Illinois? Something like that, versus George Mack, 205 out of Chicago. So I guess this was the start of wrestling in Rockford. They got Jim Londos early on.
Well, what a way to kick it off. They should have got Londos for, Saturday night's main event. Maybe they'd have had a big crowd.